This video is kindly sponsored by Skillshare. Check out the link in the video description to get your 2-month free trial.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the various ways in which I use my trusty iPad Pro and Apple Pencil while I'm at work as a junior doctor to make my life a little bit more efficient and more productive, which hopefully translates to a better experience for the patients that I'm helping look after. So firstly, the app that I'm using every day to keep track of my patient to-do lists is called Goodnotes. And I'm keeping track of everything I'm doing using what's called the Dash Plus productivity system. So at the moment, I'm on my general surgery placement, and that means that every morning at 7:30, we have a board round with the consultants when everyone in the team gets together and we discuss every patient on our list in turn. And when a new task or a new piece of information comes up, I'm going to be writing it down with a little dash. So for example, let's say the patient in bed 18A needs to have their chest drain removed. I'll be writing dash, chest drain, remove. And let's say the patient in 18B needs 2 units of blood transfused. I would like 2 units transfused. Let's say the patient in bed 21 needs a cardiology referral. Let's say the patient in 23 needs a gastro referral. Let's say the patient in bed 25 needs to be booked for an endovac change. And let's say the patient in bed 26 is going home and therefore needs a TTO and a discharge letter. And TTO is just the acronym for the drugs that we send patients home with. And the idea behind the Dash Plus productivity system is that when you've done a task, you turn it into a plus. So for example, let's say I've removed this chest drain, I would turn that into a plus. Let's say the 2 units of transfusion are ongoing, I'd turn that into a plus. Let's say I've spoken to cardiology, that becomes a plus. And the cool thing about this is that now when I glance through my list, all I have to do is find the dashes, and then I know that that's what I have left to do. There's a few other cool features built into this magical productivity system. So let's say there's a task that doesn't need to be done today, it's being pushed back till tomorrow. I would then turn the dash into a back arrow, which shows that it's being pushed back. Or let's say there's a task that one of my fellow junior doctor colleagues is helping with, I would turn that into a forward arrow because it's as if the task has been forwarded onto them. And finally, let's say there's a piece of information that doesn't actually need acting on, I would turn that into a little triangle. That would be the notation for bits of information. There's a second method that I use to keep track of certain tasks, and this is a method that doctors everywhere use, but I've never seen a name for it, so let's call it the box shade productivity system. And this is great for multi-step processes. So for example, let's say a patient needs to have a blood test, I would switch to the red pen and I'd be doing a little box next to their bed number, which means they need to have bloods requested. Then once the bloods have been requested on the system, I'll put a little line through it, which means they've been requested. Then when the bloods have been physically taken from the patient, I would do a half shading, which means they've been physically taken. And then finally, once I've looked at the blood results and acted on whatever needs acting on, I would do a full shading. And this lets me keep track of the patient's blood tests as the day progresses. And one of the major benefits of doing it on something like Goodnotes is that I can use the highlighter feature to flag up certain things. So usually if there's a task that's urgent, I would highlight it in yellow, and that's quite easy to do. Or let's say a patient is going home that day, I tend to flag that up in green, which gives me a nice idea of who's going home that day. And finally, if there's ever anything that needs handing over to the night team, I usually shade that in purple, which reminds me to hand it over at the end of the day. So this is all well and good, but you might be wondering very reasonably how something like an iPad fits in with data protection regulations, and here is how. Firstly, the information that I write on the iPad has no patient identifiable information on it, just the bed numbers and the task that has to be written. Secondly, I've installed all of my hospital's various enterprise level security certificates on this iPad, which means if it ever gets lost, it can be remotely wiped by the admin team. Thirdly, the iPad is encrypted and secured with a password that, as you might know if you're familiar with the Apple News, even the FBI can't crack. Fourthly, nothing that I do that involves any kind of patient to-do list or anything like that is ever synced to iCloud. And this is the reason why I'm using Goodnotes rather than Notability. I use Notability for everything else in my life, and I sync that with iCloud because it's convenient. But for Goodnotes, I've specifically turned off the iCloud sync so that the only copy of this data is stored on the local device. And finally, I treat every document on Goodnotes as I would a physical handover sheet that doctors all around the world use. And what we do is that we grab those handover sheets at the end of the day and we put them in the confidential waste bin baskets, and then they get shredded and incinerated or whatever. So to match that, before leaving the hospital at the end of the day, I always make sure to delete the Goodnotes document that I'm using for that day, which means I never have any even vaguely patient data stored on my device when I go home. So those are the 5 ways in which I think this iPad is a very secure way of storing patient to-do lists, and I've actually discussed this with the senior management team at my hospital who are quite happy with using the iPad in this way. And in fact, I actually think the main benefit of this system is that it's just so much more secure than the standard pen and paper list printing out your patient list system that doctors everywhere use, because it's so easy to lose a list. And hospitals around the UK have been fined hundreds of thousands of pounds for doctors accidentally leaving a patient list in like the local sandwich bar or in the cafe downstairs. It's so easy to lose a piece of paper. It's arguably so much harder to lose your iPad. So one of the great things about working in Cambridge is that my hospital was the first one in the UK to go completely paperless way back in 2014. The way it works is that when you're connected to Wi-Fi, you log in via the hospital's apparently ultra mega super secure internal type system. And this comes in particularly handy because at the moment I'm on my general surgery placement. We've got our patients spread out throughout the hospital. And so when we have our consultant ward rounds, when we as the junior doctors are going around with them, we don't want to be getting to individual wards and then wasting time trying to find a computer, logging in, waiting for it to load, all that faff. If I have the iPad with me, which I do every single day, then I just log into the system on the iPad. And so the consultant sees the patient, I squat by the bedside, stick the iPad in my lap, and I type up the notes. And it means I've got access to things like their electronic record, their blood results, their vital signs overnight. And it becomes a much more efficient way of running the ward round. Thirdly, I find myself often using the iPad to look stuff up very quickly when I'm at work. So doctors clearly are not infallible. We make mistakes. We forget some things sometimes. So for example, if there's like a drug that I need to prescribe that I haven't prescribed in a while, so I can't remember the dose off the top of my head, I'm going to look it up in the British National Formulary, the BNF. They've got an official app, which means you can pretty much search for any drug and they will give you the indication, the dose, and all the various interactions of that drug so you can see if it's safe to give it to a patient. And if I ever come across a drug or a disease and I can't quite remember what it is or what it does, then I will just Google it and look it up on Wikipedia. So for example, let's say I come across Tangier's disease and I'm like, oh, I've heard of that, but I can't quite remember what it is. I'm just gonna find the Wikipedia article. And before anyone thinks about leaving a comment like, oh my God, lol, I can't believe doctors use Wikipedia, what is the world coming to? Firstly, Wikipedia is absolutely amazing. And secondly, obviously, if it's a mission critical thing, like, a treatment algorithm for someone having a heart attack right now, or a treatment algorithm for someone having a stroke, I'd be using a more official resource like the NICE guidelines, which is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, or something like BMJ Best Practice, which is an evidence-based subscription service offered by the British Medical Journal. But if it's just something like reminding myself what Tangier's disease is or like what Wallenberg syndrome is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using something like Wikipedia to just refresh my memory. And the great thing about using the iPad for that is that when a patient sees this kind of image, they're like, what's going on? This is unprofessional. Whereas if you're busting out your iPad Pro and you're looking something up and you're kind of doing this sort of thing, no one is thinking that you're there texting your friends, even though you could be on iMessage or on Messenger. People are thinking that you're doing work, because you're doing work. You're looking stuff up, you're helping the patients, you're jogging your memory. But the point is that this just has a much more professional image than busting out your phone to do the same thing. Finally, when I'm at work, there's often moments of downtime where there is nothing really going on. One of the really nice things about having the iPad is that this downtime then becomes productive. Like, I can do useful things in that time. So for example, I might, open up Notion and plan a video or two, or I might reply to some emails. And actually recently, because I've started preparing for my postgraduate medical exams, the MRCP, I've actually started doing some past paper questions online on an online question bank. And that's a pretty handy way to spend some of my free time when there's nothing going on. And speaking of productive downtime, one of the great things you can do during your downtime is to be productive by learning something on Skillshare, who are very kindly sponsoring this video. Skillshare, as I'm sure you've heard by now, is a massive online community containing thousands of classes from all sorts of things, from entrepreneurship to creative skills, so things like marketing, productivity, digital illustration, animation, stuff like that. It's based on a membership model, which means that if you get the premium membership subscription for less than $10 a month, you get unlimited access to all of the amazing high quality classes on Skillshare. And I've personally been enjoying this class from Thomas Frank, who is one of my personal YouTube idols. He's got what's probably the best productivity themed channel on YouTube. And he's got this like masterclass where he's talking about all of his methods for maximizing productivity and efficiency, like how to get better with email, how to quick capture things into various different apps. And I found this really handy, and I've taken a lot of tips from Thomas Frank's Skillshare class and applied it to my own life and my own productivity system. So if you want to give Skillshare a go, check out the link in the video description, and that'll give you a free 2-month trial of Skillshare Premium that you can use to browse the classes to your heart's content. So thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you want to find out more about how I use my iPad, you should click on the thing over here, and that will be a video about my 30 favorite iPad apps, which has been quite popular. People seem to like this sort of thing. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.